It was the sound of shredding papers and panicked sobbing that made Lucan Faraway look twice at the young woman sitting in her BMW outside the downtown Portland office building. As a divorced mechanic running late-night towing calls to pay his bills, he'd seen plenty of breakdowns, but this felt different. The woman was frantically destroying documents, tears streaming down her face as she stared at what looked like financial records, when she suddenly bolted from her car. Leaving the engine running and her purse behind, Lucan knew something was terribly wrong. What he didn't know was that Nadia Crestwell had just discovered the horrifying truth about her family's pharmaceutical empire, that her billion-dollar inheritance was built on deliberately addictive medications that had killed thousands. In helping her escape that night, Lucan would uncover a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of corporate America, and Nadia would have to choose between a life of luxury and doing what's right. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The glass towers of downtown Portland gleamed under the October rain as Nadia Crestwell sat in her BMW, staring at the documents that had just shattered her entire world. Her hands trembled as she read through the leaked internal emails for the third time, each word hitting like a physical blow. Phase 3 trials show addiction rates of 47% within 6 months. Recommend suppressing this data and moving forward with FDA approval. The email was signed by her own father, Dr. Edmund Crestwell, CEO of Crestwell Pharmaceuticals. Another document detailed how their flagship pain medication, Novaril, had been deliberately formulated to create dependency. Marketing strategies outlined targeting vulnerable populations, elderly patients with chronic pain, injured workers, anyone desperate enough to need relief. The projected addiction rates weren't a bug in the system. They were the feature that would generate billions in recurring revenue. Nadia's breath came in short gasps as she scrolled through more evidence. Suicide rates in clinical trials, concealed overdose statistics, bribes paid to regulatory officials, and most devastating of all, a spreadsheet tracking acceptable casualty rates for different demographics. Her family's pharmaceutical empire, worth $15 billion, was built on the systematic addiction and destruction of hundreds of thousands of lives. At 28, Nadia had spent her entire adult life preparing to take over the company. Harvard Business School, internships at every level of the organization, board meetings where she'd presented quarterly growth strategies. She'd believed she was inheriting a legacy of healing, of making the world better through medical innovation. Instead, she discovered she was next in line to run what amounted to a legalized drug cartel. The documents had been delivered to her apartment that morning by Dr. Sarah Kim, a former Crestwell researcher whose conscience had finally overridden her non-disclosure agreement. Your coronation as CEO is scheduled for next week, Dr. Kim had said, her face grave. But you deserve to know what you're really inheriting. These files represent just a fraction of what your family has covered up over the past 15 years. Now, sitting in her car outside the Crestwell headquarters, where her promotion ceremony was supposed to take place tomorrow, Nadia felt like she might vomit. Her phone buzzed constantly with congratulatory messages from business associates, family, friends, and board members. Everyone was excited about the bright future she would lead the company toward. She thought about her trust fund, worth over $300 million in Crestwell stock and pharmaceutical patents. Money that had paid for her private schools, her Harvard education, her penthouse apartment, her European vacations. Blood money. Every dollar had been earned through the suffering of people who'd trusted their family to help them heal. Nadia's reflection stared back at her from the car's tinted windows. Designer suit, perfect makeup, every inch the polished corporate executive. But underneath, she felt like a fraud, complicit in atrocities she'd never even known were happening. Her phone rang again. Her father, probably wondering why she hadn't shown up for their final preparation meeting. She couldn't answer. She couldn't face him, knowing what she now knew. But she also couldn't pretend this information didn't exist. Tomorrow, she was scheduled to stand before shareholders, employees, and media to officially become the youngest female CEO of a Fortune 500 pharmaceutical company. The golden girl taking over the family business. The irony was crushing. For years, she'd prided herself on her ethical business practices, her focus on patient outcomes over pure profit. She'd written papers on corporate social responsibility, given speeches about the moral obligations of pharmaceutical companies, all while being groomed to perpetuate the very system she claimed to oppose. Rain pelted the windshield as Nadia made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't be part of this anymore. She couldn't take blood money and call it an inheritance. She couldn't stand up tomorrow and promise innovation and healing while knowing the company's real business model was creating and profiting from addiction. With shaking hands, she began feeding the leaked documents through her car's paper shredder, tears streaming down her face. Each page destroyed was another piece of evidence of her family's crimes, but keeping them felt like becoming an accessory after the fact. She needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to expose this without destroying herself in the process. But as she shredded the last page, panic set in. What was she doing? These were the only copies she had. Without evidence, who would believe such devastating accusations against one of America's most respected pharmaceutical companies? Her family's legal team would crush any whistleblower attempts, just as they'd apparently been doing for years. The weight of what she'd discovered, combined with the realization of what she'd just destroyed, overwhelmed her completely. Nadia threw open her car door and stumbled out into the rain, her carefully styled hair and expensive suit forgotten. She needed air. She needed space. She needed to get away from everything that connected her to the Crestwell name. She left her purse, her phone, her keys, everything sitting in the running BMW as she walked rapidly down the street, not even sure where she was going. Behind her, she could hear her phone ringing incessantly from inside the car, probably her father growing increasingly impatient about her absence from their meeting. The downtown Portland streets blurred past as Nadia walked faster and faster, her designer heels clicking against wet pavement. She was the heir to a pharmaceutical empire built on lies and death, and tomorrow she was supposed to smile and accept that legacy as her destiny. Lucan Faraway was having the kind of night that reminded him why he'd started his own towing business. Instead of staying at his ex-wife's family's auto shop, 3 broken-down vehicles, 2 insurance disputes, and 1 irate drunk driver who'd insisted his BMW could definitely make it home despite the steam pouring from under the hood. It was nearly midnight, and all Lucan wanted was to finish this last call and get home to his small apartment above the garage. At 34, Lucan had learned to read people quickly during his 5 years running emergency roadside service. Drunk college kids, panicked soccer moms with flat tires, business executives who treated him like he was invisible. He'd seen them all. But something about the abandoned BMW, with its engine still running, caught his attention for all the wrong reasons. The car was double parked outside the Crestwell Pharmaceuticals building, hazard lights flashing, driver's door hanging open like whoever had been inside had fled in a hurry. Expensive leather interior, documents scattered across the passenger seat, and a woman's purse sitting open with its contents spilling out. This wasn't a typical breakdown situation. Lucan parked his tow truck behind the BMW and approached carefully. Years of working nights in downtown Portland had taught him to be cautious around abandoned vehicles, especially in the business district where corporate executives sometimes had very complicated problems. The last thing he needed was to get involved in someone else's drama when he had his own bills to pay and his own responsibilities to handle. But as he got closer, he could see the shredded papers scattered around the car's interior and across the wet pavement. Someone had been destroying documents in a hurry, and from what he could make out, they were financial records or legal papers of some kind. The kind of paperwork that usually meant serious trouble for whoever owned it. Lucan's instincts, honed from years of helping people in crisis situations, told him this wasn't just about a broken-down car. Someone was in real distress, possibly danger, and they'd abandoned everything to get away quickly. His practical side said to call it into the police and move on with his night. But his conscience, shaped by his own experiences with feeling trapped and desperate, wouldn't let him just drive away. He was looking through the car windows to see if there was any obvious sign of the owner when he heard rapid footsteps on the sidewalk behind him. A young woman was walking fast, almost running, her expensive business suit soaked through from the rain and her blonde hair disheveled. She kept looking over her shoulder like she expected someone to be following her. Even in the dim streetlight, Lucan could tell she was upset. Her face was streaked with tears, and her whole posture screamed panic and desperation. When she saw him standing next to the BMW, she froze mid-step, her eyes wide with what looked like fear. "Is this your car, ma'am?" Lucan called out, keeping his voice gentle and non-threatening. He'd learned that people in crisis situations could startle easily, and the last thing he wanted was to make things worse for someone who was clearly already having the worst night of their life. The woman, Nadia, though Lucan didn't know her name yet, stared at him for a long moment, seeming to weigh her options. She was clearly trying to decide if he represented another threat or potentially someone who might help. Lucan could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, the same look he'd seen on his own face in mirrors during the worst parts of his divorce when he'd been trying to figure out who he could trust. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I'm just a tow truck driver," he said, raising his hand slightly to show he wasn't a threat. "Got a call about an abandoned vehicle, but it looks like maybe you just needed a moment to collect yourself. Are you okay?" The simple question seemed to break something in Nadia's composure. Fresh tears started streaming down her face as she shook her head. "No," she said, her voice barely audible above the sound of rain hitting the pavement. "I'm not okay. I'm so far from okay that I don't even know where okay is anymore." Lucan had been in the crisis assistance business long enough to recognize someone at the edge of a complete breakdown. Whatever had happened to this woman tonight, it wasn't something that could be fixed with jumper cables or a tire change. This was the kind of help that required actual human compassion, the kind his ex-wife used to say he was too willing to provide to strangers. "Do you want to sit in my truck for a minute?" he offered. "Get out of the rain while you figure out what you want to do next. I've got hot coffee in a thermos, and the heater works pretty well." Nadia looked at the tow truck, then back at her abandoned BMW with all her personal belongings still inside. Lucan could practically see her thinking through the implications of accepting help from a complete stranger versus trying to handle whatever crisis she was facing on her own. "I don't even know you," she said finally, but her voice carried more confusion than suspicion. "I'm Lucan," he replied simply. "I run Faraway Emergency Services. Been helping people with car trouble and worse for about 5 years now. Right now, it looks like you could use someone who's not involved in whatever situation you're dealing with." The offer hung in the air between them as Nadia considered her options. Behind her, Lucan could see security guards starting to take notice of the abandoned BMW from inside the Crestwell building. Whatever had driven her to flee her car was likely to catch up with her soon if she stayed on the street. "If I get in your truck," Nadia said slowly, "will you promise not to call anyone unless I ask you to?" "Not the police, not security, not anyone?" Lucan nodded. "Your business is your business. I'm just offering to get you dry and somewhere safe, while you think through whatever you need to think through." For a moment that felt much longer than it actually was, Nadia studied his face in the dim light. She was clearly trying to read his intentions, to figure out if he was genuinely trying to help or if this was some kind of trap. Lucan stood quietly, letting her make the assessment at her own pace. Finally, she took a step toward the tow truck. "Okay," she said, "but I need to get my purse first." As Nadia approached her BMW to retrieve her belongings, Lucan noticed the security guards inside the Crestwell building had started moving toward the main entrance. Whatever situation this woman was fleeing from was about to get more complicated, and his instincts told him they needed to move quickly. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I don't mean to pressure you, but those guards are heading this way. If you don't want to deal with them right now, we should probably get going." Nadia's head snapped up from where she'd been gathering documents from her passenger seat. Through the glass doors of the corporate building, she could see two security guards pointing in their direction and speaking rapidly into their radios. Her father must have sent them to look for her when she didn't show up for their meeting. "Oh God," she breathed. "They're calling my father. He'll be here in minutes. And I can't face him right now. I just can't." Panic renewed itself in her voice as she grabbed her purse and phone, shoving loose papers back into her briefcase with shaking hands. Lucan could see her trying to make decisions about what to take and what to leave behind, but her emotional state was making it impossible for her to think clearly. "Leave the car," Lucan said firmly. "Whatever you absolutely need, grab it now. Everything else can be replaced or retrieved later." Nadia looked at him like he'd suggested she abandon a piece of herself. The BMW represented security, status, independence, all the things she'd taken for granted about her life until a few hours ago. But as the security guards pushed through the building's front doors, she realized Lucan was right. The car was just another connection to a life she was no longer sure she could live. She pulled out her briefcase and a small overnight bag she kept in the backseat for business trips, then hesitated. Her laptop contained years of work, research projects, business plans for the company's future. But it also contained email correspondence with her father and other executives that might implicate her in the cover-up if anyone discovered what she now knew. "The laptop too," Lucan said, reading her hesitation. "If it's important enough to worry about, it's important enough to bring." Nadia grabbed the computer and slammed the car door. But as they started toward the tow truck, one of the security guards called out across the parking area, "Miss Crestwell. Miss Crestwell, please wait. Your father is looking for you." The use of her name made Nadia freeze. She'd been hoping to have more time before her family realized she was missing. Time to figure out her next steps. But clearly, her absence from the meeting had already raised alarms. "Friend of yours?" Lucan asked, though he was already moving toward the driver's side of his truck. "Employee of my father's," Nadia replied, her voice tight with stress. "If they catch up with me now, I'll end up back in that building answering questions I'm not ready to answer." Lucan didn't need more explanation than that. He'd seen enough domestic disputes and family crises to recognize someone trying to buy time and space to make important decisions. "Get in the truck. We're leaving," as Nadia climbed into the passenger seat of the tow truck. She could hear the security guard's footsteps getting closer on the wet pavement. Through the side mirror, she could see them speaking into their radios again, probably giving her father a real-time update on her location and condition. Lucan started the engine and pulled away from the curb with practiced efficiency, navigating through downtown Portland's late-night traffic like someone who knew every shortcut and alternate route. As they put distance between themselves and the Crestwell building, Nadia felt some of the immediate panic start to subside, replaced by the surreal realization that she was in a tow truck with a complete stranger, fleeing from her own family. "Where are we going?" she asked, suddenly aware that she'd made a major decision without thinking through the consequences. "Wherever you need to go," Lucan replied. "But first, we're getting out of the downtown area in case those security guards decide to follow us or call in additional help." As they drove through the Portland streets, Nadia's phone began ringing incessantly. The display showed her father's number, then her mother's, then her assistant's, then numbers she didn't recognize but assumed were other company executives or family friends who'd been enlisted to help locate her. "Popular tonight," Lucan observed, glancing at the constantly buzzing device. "My father doesn't handle it well when things don't go according to his schedule," Nadia said with bitter humor. "My guess is that half the Portland business community is getting calls right now asking if they've seen me." She turned off the phone and dropped it into her purse, cutting off the insistent ringing. The sudden silence felt both liberating and terrifying. For the first time in her adult life, she was completely unreachable, completely outside the network of expectations and obligations that had structured every day since college. "I should probably ask," Lucan said as they stopped at a red light. "Are you in some kind of danger? Do I need to be worried about anyone following us or trying to track you down?" Nadia considered the question. Was she in danger? Her family wasn't violent, but they were incredibly powerful and had vast resources at their disposal. If they wanted to find her, they probably could. More importantly, if they discovered that she'd learned about the company's illegal activities, they might consider her a threat to be neutralized. "I don't think they'll hurt me," she said slowly, "but they'll definitely try to control the situation. My family doesn't leave loose ends, especially when there's money involved." "And there's a lot of money involved?" $15 billion worth of pharmaceutical company, Nadia replied. "And a $300 million trust fund that I just found out is funded by deliberately addicting people to painkillers." Lucan let out a low whistle. He'd been expecting relationship drama, or maybe a business dispute, not corporate malfeasance on a scale that could affect thousands of lives. Suddenly, the abandoned BMW and the destroyed documents made a lot more sense. "That's the kind of discovery that changes everything," he said. "It changes everything," Nadia agreed. "I was supposed to become CEO tomorrow morning. Stand up in front of shareholders and employees and promise to continue the company's tradition of innovation and healing. Now I know that tradition includes systematically addicting patients and covering up overdose deaths." They drove in silence for several minutes as Lucan processed this information, and Nadia stared out at the city lights. She'd grown up in Portland, attended private schools here, built relationships with the business and social community. Now she felt like a stranger in her own hometown, looking at everything through the lens of her new knowledge. "I need somewhere to think," she said finally. "Somewhere my family won't immediately look for me. Somewhere I can figure out what to do with what I've learned." Lucan nodded. "I know a place. It's not fancy, but it's private and your family's security team won't think to check there." As they headed toward the outskirts of the city, Nadia realized she was putting tremendous trust in someone she'd known for less than an hour. But given what she'd discovered about the people she'd trusted her entire life, maybe a stranger's kindness was exactly what she needed. Lucan's garage sat in a quiet industrial area on the outskirts of Portland, surrounded by auto repair shops and small manufacturing businesses that had seen better decades. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood where corporate executives typically found themselves, which made it perfect for someone trying to stay off their family's radar. The building was modest but well-maintained, with Faraway Emergency Services painted in simple letters on the side and several tow trucks parked in the adjacent lot. Lucan pulled around to the back entrance and cut the engine, giving Nadia a moment to take in her surroundings. "It's not the Hilton," he said with a slight smile, "but there's a small apartment upstairs where I live, and my office has a couch if you need somewhere to sit and think without anyone bothering you." Nadia looked at the building, then at Lucan, still trying to process how dramatically her life had changed in the span of a few hours. This morning, she'd been the heir apparent to a pharmaceutical empire, living in a downtown penthouse and preparing for the most important day of her professional life. Now she was sitting in a tow truck outside a garage, having fled from everything she'd thought she wanted. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You don't know me. You don't know if I'm telling the truth about anything, and you're potentially getting involved in something that could bring you a lot of trouble." Lucan considered the question as he gathered his tools and paperwork from the truck's cab. "5 years ago, I was going through a messy divorce," he said. "My ex-wife's family owned a successful auto shop, and I'd been working there since we got married. When things fell apart between us, I suddenly found myself with no job, no home, and no one who wanted to help because everyone was afraid of taking sides." He gestured toward the garage building. "I was sleeping in my truck and using gas station bathrooms when a stranger offered me temporary work and a place to stay while I got back on my feet. Didn't ask for my life story, didn't judge me for my situation, just saw someone who needed help and provided it." Nadia felt something shift in her chest as she listened. Here was someone who understood what it felt like to have your entire life structure collapse overnight, to suddenly be alone with nowhere to turn. "The person who helped you," she said, "did they want anything in return?" "Just that I pay it forward." "Someday," Lucan replied. "Help someone else when I have the opportunity and the resources. Tonight feels like that opportunity." They walked toward the building's back entrance, Nadia carrying her briefcase and overnight bag like precious cargo. The weight of everything she'd left behind, her car, her apartment, her position in the company, was starting to hit her as the immediate panic of escape faded into the reality of what came next. Lucan's office was small but organized, with filing cabinets full of service records, a desk covered in invoices and customer information, and a worn but comfortable couch positioned near a window overlooking the parking area. The walls were decorated with certifications from towing associations and a few personal photos that Nadia assumed showed friends and family. "Coffee's about 4 hours old, but I can make fresh," Lucan offered, heading toward a small kitchen area in the corner. "Or there's water, soda, whatever you need." "Fresh coffee sounds perfect," Nadia said, settling onto the couch with her briefcase. "I have a feeling I'm going to need the caffeine to process everything that's happened tonight." As Lucan started the coffee maker, Nadia opened her briefcase and pulled out the documents she'd managed to save from her car. Financial records, internal emails, research data, pieces of the puzzle that revealed her family's systematic deception. Even with most of the evidence destroyed, what remained painted a clear picture of corporate malfeasance on a massive scale. "Can I ask what you discovered that made you run?" Lucan said, bringing 2 steaming mugs to the coffee table. Nadia took a sip of coffee and felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. For the first time in hours, she was somewhere safe, with someone who wasn't trying to manage her reaction or control her next steps. "My family's pharmaceutical company has been deliberately creating addictive medications," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. "They've known for years that their flagship painkiller causes dependency in nearly half of patients, but instead of reformulating or warning doctors, they've been marketing it more aggressively to vulnerable populations." Lucan set down his coffee mug harder than intended. "Jesus, how many people are we talking about?" "Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions over the past 15 years, Nadia replied. "The internal documents I saw tonight showed they've been tracking overdose rates, suicide rates, addiction statistics, and categorizing them as acceptable losses for market share growth." She pulled out her laptop and opened a spreadsheet she'd managed to save before destroying the physical documents. "They have a whole department dedicated to suppressing negative research and bribing regulatory officials. Meanwhile, they've been donating millions to addiction treatment centers and public health initiatives to maintain their reputation as a company that cares about patient welfare." Lucan studied the numbers on the screen, his expression growing increasingly grim. "Your trust fund money comes from this." "Every dollar of it," Nadia confirmed. "My college education, my apartment, my lifestyle, everything has been funded by profits from deliberately harming people who trusted us to help them heal. The weight of that realization hung heavy in the small office. Lucan had seen plenty of human crises during his years in emergency services, but nothing on the scale of what Nadia was describing. This wasn't just personal tragedy. It was systematic. Corporate evil that had affected countless families across the country. "What happens if you become CEO tomorrow?" he asked. "I become personally responsible for continuing the cover-up," Nadia said. "I either participate in the conspiracy or become a liability that needs to be managed. There's no neutral position when you're talking about $15 billion and potential criminal charges." They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the implications of her situation. Outside the window, Portland's night shift was winding down, delivery trucks making final runs, security guards checking empty buildings, street cleaners working their way through the industrial district. Normal people doing normal work, unaware that a few miles away, a corporate empire built on systematic deception was about to crown a new leader. "Do you have any allies inside the company?" Lucan asked. "Anyone who might support you if you decided to expose what you've learned?" Nadia shook her head. "The people who discovered this information before me either took money to stay quiet or ended up discredited and pushed out. The researcher who brought me the documents tonight has been trying to find someone with enough power to act on the evidence, but everyone she approached either ignored her or reported her to company security." "What about outside the company? Journalists, prosecutors, regulatory agencies?" "My family has relationships with all of them," Nadia said bitterly. "Campaign contributions, charitable donations, consulting contracts, board positions. The same money that funded my education has been buying influence and protection for years." Lucan stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his small business empire. 3 tow trucks, a garage bay, and an apartment upstairs. Everything he owned could probably fit in the trunk of Nadia's abandoned BMW, but it was his, earned through honest work and free from the kind of moral compromises she was describing. "So what do you want to do?" he asked finally. Nadia looked up from her laptop, meeting his eyes with a mixture of determination and fear. "I want to find a way to expose them without destroying myself in the process. I want to make sure the people who've been harmed by our medications get justice. And I want to figure out how to build a life that doesn't depend on blood money." "That's a pretty tall order," Lucan observed. "I know," Nadia replied, "but I can't think of any other choice that lets me look at myself in the mirror." As the night stretched toward dawn, Lucan made the decision to close his business for the day and focus on helping Nadia navigate her crisis. He called his answering service and rescheduled his morning appointments, then settled in for what was clearly going to be a long conversation about very complicated problems. "Tell me about your family," he said, refilling their coffee cups as they spread documents across his desk. "Help me understand what kind of people we're dealing with here." Nadia pulled up photos on her phone, family portraits from charity events, business conferences, social gatherings. To any outside observer, the Crestwells looked like the perfect American success story. Intelligent, attractive, philanthropic leaders who'd built a business empire while maintaining strong family values. "My father, Edmund, started the company 30 years ago with genuinely good intentions," she began. "He was a research pharmacist who wanted to develop better pain management solutions for patients with chronic conditions. My mother, Patricia, has a background in marketing and business development. Together, they built Crestwell Pharmaceuticals from a small research lab into one of the most successful pharmaceutical companies in the country." She scrolled through more photos, showing Lucan images from her privileged upbringing. Private schools, family vacations to European medical conferences, graduation ceremonies at Ivy League universities. "I grew up believing we were making the world a better place," she continued. "Family dinners were full of conversations about breakthrough therapies, patient testimonials, research breakthroughs. I was so proud of what we did that I wrote my college application essays about carrying on the family legacy of healing. Lucan studied a photo of teenage Nadia presenting her father with an award from a patient advocacy group. When do you think things changed? When did helping people become secondary to making money? That's what I've been trying to figure out, Nadia replied. Based on the documents I saw tonight, the shift happened gradually over about 5 years. At first, it might have been genuine concern about the company's financial stability during a difficult period in the pharmaceutical industry. But somewhere along the way, profitability became more important than patient safety. She pulled up financial records on her laptop, showing Lucan the correlation between Crestwell's stock price and the increasingly aggressive marketing of their addictive medications. The turning point seems to have been when they realized that addiction wasn't a side effect to be minimized. It was a business opportunity to be maximized, she said, her voice heavy with disgust. Once patients become dependent, they're customers for life, and they're willing to pay increasingly high prices to avoid withdrawal symptoms. Lucan had been around enough addiction during his years working nights in Portland to understand the human cost of what she was describing. He'd given rides to people heading to methadone clinics, helped families deal with overdose situations, seen the desperation that drove people to increasingly dangerous behaviors to maintain their dependencies. How many people work for the company? He asked. About 15,000 employees worldwide, Nadia replied. Research scientists, manufacturing workers, sales representatives, administrative staff. Most of them have no idea what the executives have been doing. They're just doing their jobs, trying to develop and distribute medications that help people. The scope of the situation was staggering. Exposing the company's crimes would potentially destroy the livelihoods of thousands of innocent employees, while also disrupting the supply of legitimate medications that genuinely helped patients. But allowing the conspiracy to continue would mean condemning hundreds of thousands more people to addiction and potential death. What about your extended family? Lucan asked. Aunts, uncles, cousins? Anyone who might support you if you decide to blow the whistle? Nadia's expression darkened. My uncle Richard is the company's general counsel. He's the one who's been managing the legal strategy to suppress evidence and silence whistleblowers. My Aunt Susan runs the charitable foundation that's been used to launder the company's reputation. My younger brother James works in sales and has been directly involved in targeting vulnerable populations with aggressive marketing campaigns. She showed him a family tree diagram she'd sketched on a napkin, with lines indicating how each family member was connected to different aspects of the cover-up. Everyone with significant company stock has a financial interest in maintaining the status quo, she explained. And everyone in leadership positions has potential criminal liability if the truth comes out. I'm not just threatening a business. I'm threatening the freedom and financial security of my entire family. Lucan walked over to a filing cabinet and pulled out a bottle of whiskey he kept for particularly difficult nights. I think we both need something stronger than coffee, he said, pouring small amounts into 2 glasses. I don't usually drink, Nadia said, accepting the glass anyway. I don't usually harbor fugitive pharmaceutical heiresses, Lucan replied with a grim smile. Seems like a night for exceptions to normal rules. They sat quietly for a few minutes, both processing the magnitude of the situation. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise over Portland's industrial district, and Nadia realized she'd been awake for over 24 hours. Her CEO coronation ceremony was scheduled to begin in 3 hours, and she was sitting in a garage office wearing yesterday's business suit, planning to destroy everything she'd spent her life working toward. Do you have somewhere you can stay while you figure this out? Lucan asked. Friends who aren't connected to your family's business? Nadia thought about her social circle, college roommates who now worked in finance, business school classmates who'd started their own companies, friends from the Portland social scene who attended the same charity events as her parents. Most of my relationships are somehow connected to the family business, she admitted, either through professional connections or social obligations. I can't think of anyone I could trust with this information who wouldn't feel obligated to contact my parents out of concern for my welfare. What about the researcher who brought you the evidence? Dr. Kim? She's already taking enormous risks by speaking out, Nadia said. I can't ask her to hide me too. If my family discovers she's been helping me, they'll destroy her career and probably pursue criminal charges for theft of proprietary information. Lucan finished his whiskey and made a decision that surprised both of them. You can stay here, he said. I've got a spare bedroom upstairs, and nobody's going to think to look for a pharmaceutical heiress in a mechanic's apartment above a tow truck garage. Nadia stared at him. You can't be serious. You barely know me, and I just told you I'm about to declare war on a $15 billion corporation. Why would you put yourself at risk like that? Because, Lucan said, meeting her eyes directly, sometimes doing the right thing is more important than doing the safe thing. And because I've got enough experience with powerful people trying to control situations to recognize when someone needs genuine help rather than management. The offer hung in the air between them as Nadia considered her options. Accept help from a stranger who'd already shown more integrity in one night than her own family had demonstrated in years. Or try to navigate this crisis alone with resources that were probably already being monitored by her father's security team. If I stay, she said slowly, I need you to understand that this could get very complicated very quickly. My family has resources and connections that most people can't imagine. If they decide you're an obstacle to getting me back under their control, they won't hesitate to use whatever leverage they can find. What kind of leverage? Lucan asked. Business licenses, tax audits, regulatory inspections, insurance issues, zoning violations, Nadia listed. They've been buying influence for years, and they know how to apply pressure through seemingly legitimate channels. Lucan looked around his small office, at the business he'd built from nothing after losing everything in his divorce. It represented 5 years of 18-hour days, careful financial planning, and slowly building a reputation for reliable service in Portland's competitive towing industry. I'll take that risk, he said finally. But I need you to promise me something in return. What? That you'll actually follow through on exposing them, Lucan said. I'm not interested in helping you buy time to make peace with your family, or find a way to profit from keeping their secrets. If I'm putting my business and my life on the line, it's because you're committed to doing the right thing, not because you're having temporary doubts about inheriting blood money. Nadia looked at him for a long moment, recognizing the seriousness of what he was offering and what he was asking in return. This wasn't just temporary shelter. It was a partnership with someone willing to help her fight one of the most powerful pharmaceutical companies in America. I promise, she said. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'm going to make sure the truth comes out and the people responsible face consequences. As they shook hands on the agreement, both of them understood they were crossing a line from which there would be no return. By dawn, Nadia would be officially missing, and her family would be mobilizing every resource at their disposal to find her and control the situation. But for the first time since discovering the truth about her inheritance, she didn't feel alone. 3 days after Nadia's disappearance, the full scope of who Lucan was helping became impossible to ignore. The missing heiress story had exploded across every major news outlet, with Crestwell Pharmaceutical stock price plummeting as investors, worried about leadership instability and potential family drama affecting the company's operations. Lucan's small apartment above the garage had become an unlikely command center for what was essentially economic warfare against one of America's most powerful corporations. Nadia had used her laptop and the remaining evidence to create a comprehensive database of her family's crimes, cross-referencing internal documents with public health statistics to build an irrefutable case for Systematic corporate malfeasance. I need you to understand something, Nadia said, looking up from her computer as morning news played on Lucan's small television. Her photo was displayed prominently next to headlines about the missing pharmaceutical princess and speculation about her mental state following the pressure of impending corporate leadership. "What's that?" Lucan asked, bringing coffee and the breakfast he prepared from his limited kitchen supplies. "The woman you're helping isn't just wealthy," Nadia said, gesturing toward the news coverage. "According to Forbes, I'm the 43rd richest person under 30 in America. My trust fund alone is worth more than the entire annual GDP of some small countries. The company I was supposed to inherit employs more people than live in most cities." Lucan sat down across from her at the small kitchen table, studying her face as she spoke. Over the past few days, he'd gotten to know Nadia as a person rather than an abstraction, someone who made excellent coffee, helped him organize his business, paperwork, and demonstrated remarkable patience when his upstairs neighbor's music got too loud. But the news coverage was forcing both of them to confront the massive scale of what they were attempting. "The FBI has opened an investigation into my disappearance," she continued, scrolling through news articles on her laptop. "Not because they think I've been kidnapped, but because my absence has triggered federal oversight of Crestwell Pharmaceuticals' operations. When the potential CEO of a major pharmaceutical company vanishes right before taking control, it raises questions about what she might have discovered." She turned the laptop screen toward Lucan, showing him an article from the Wall Street Journal about trading suspensions and emergency board meetings. "My family is trying to maintain the narrative that I'm having a breakdown from the pressure of leadership transition. But investors and regulators are starting to ask harder questions about why I would run away from a $15 billion inheritance." Lucan read through the article, noting mentions of Sikh investigations, congressional inquiries, and international regulatory reviews of Crestwell's drug approval processes. "How long before they trace you here?" "Probably not long," Nadia admitted. "I've been careful about digital communications, but my family has access to resources that most people can't imagine. Private investigators, technology specialists, contacts in law enforcement and regulatory agencies. If they decide to systematically search every possible location in Portland, they'll eventually get here." She pulled up another document on her laptop, a detailed organizational chart showing her family's connections throughout Oregon's business and political establishment. "My father serves on the boards of 3 major Portland companies. My mother chairs the United Way campaign and sits on the Hospital Foundation board. My uncle has been the primary legal counsel for 2 Oregon governors and maintains relationships with most of the state's federal representatives." "You're saying they own this city," Lucan observed. "Not own exactly, but they have influence and leverage everywhere that matters," Nadia replied. "If they decide you're an obstacle to recovering their missing heiress, they can make your life very difficult through completely legal channels." As if summoned by their conversation, Lucan's phone began ringing with a number he didn't recognize. When he answered, a professionally polished voice identified herself as Catherine Mills from Portland Business Licensing Services. "Mr. Faraway, we've received some concerns about potential zoning violations at your business location," she said smoothly. "We need to schedule an immediate inspection to ensure you're in compliance with current regulations for automotive services in mixed-use industrial areas." Lucan met Nadia's eyes as he responded. "I wasn't aware of any violations, Ms. Mills. Can you tell me who filed the complaint?" "I'm not able to share that information, but I can tell you that we take these matters very seriously," she replied. "How does tomorrow morning work for the inspection? Say 9 o'clock?" After scheduling the appointment and hanging up, Lucan turned to Nadia with grim understanding. "It's starting, isn't it?" "The pressure campaign," she confirmed. "They can't simply storm in here and drag me back. So they're going to make staying here as costly and complicated as possible for you. Over the next few hours, Lucan received additional calls. His business insurance company wanted to review his policies due to updated risk assessments. The city fire department needed to inspect his building for routine safety compliance. His bank called about irregularities in his business account that required immediate attention. "They're very good at this," Nadia said, watching Lucan field another bureaucratic inquiry. "It's the same strategy they've used against researchers who tried to expose their drug data, death by 1,000 cuts of regulatory harassment." But as the pressure mounted, something unexpected happened. Instead of becoming intimidated, Lucan became more determined. "You know what this tells me?" he said, hanging up from a call about supposed environmental violations. "It tells me your family is scared. If they had a clean way to discredit what you've discovered, they'd be using it instead of harassing a small business owner." Nadia felt something shift in her chest as she watched Lucan calmly deal with each new challenge. Most people in her life had been deferential to her family's power, either because they wanted something from the Crestwells or because they were intimidated by their influence. But Lucan was responding to their pressure tactics with the kind of steady resolve she'd rarely seen. "There's something else you need to know," she said, pulling up financial records on her laptop. "The full scope of what we're fighting." She showed him internal Crestwell documents detailing their global operations, pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities in 12 countries, research partnerships with major universities, distribution networks that reached into every corner of the poor American healthcare system. "This isn't just about one company," she explained. "Crestwell has joint ventures with 4 other major pharmaceutical manufacturers, licensing agreements that affect drug production across multiple countries, and financial relationships with insurance companies, hospital systems, and pharmacy chains." Lucan studied the organizational charts, beginning to understand why her family was so confident they could weather any scandal. How many people's jobs depend on keeping your family's secrets? Hundreds of thousands, probably millions if you count all the indirect employment, Nadia replied. Healthcare is one of the largest sectors of the American economy, and Crestwell is deeply integrated into that system. She pulled up another document showing the company's charitable contributions and political donations over the past decade. They've given over $500 million to medical research, patient advocacy groups, addiction treatment centers, and healthcare policy organizations, all funded by profits from deliberately addicting patients. But the recipients don't necessarily know that. So even the people fighting addiction are financially dependent on your family's business, Lucan said, recognizing the cruel irony. Exactly. And if we expose the truth about how that money was earned, we're not just threatening my family's wealth and freedom, we're threatening the funding for legitimate medical research and patient care programs. The magnitude of the situation was overwhelming. They weren't just fighting a corrupt pharmaceutical company. They were challenging an entire ecosystem of healthcare, research, and policy organizations that had become financially dependent on blood money without necessarily understanding its origins. Lucan stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his small business and the modest neighborhood that surrounded it. Everything he owned could probably be destroyed by a few phone calls from the right people in the Crestwell network. But as he thought about the thousands of people who'd been deliberately addicted to generate the profits that funded his adversary's influence, his resolve only strengthened. "I want to show you something," he said, walking over to a filing cabinet and pulling out a folder of correspondence. "What is it?" Nadia asked. "Letters from customers over the past 5 years," Lucan replied, spreading the papers across the table. "People thanking me for helping them when they were stranded, when they were scared, when they had nowhere else to turn. Nadia read through several of the handwritten notes. A single mother grateful for late-night help with a flat tire. An elderly man whose car broke down during a winter storm. A college student who couldn't afford a tow truck but received help. Anyway, This is what I built my business on, Lucan said. The idea that everyone deserves help when they need it, regardless of whether they can pay for it or whether it's convenient to provide it. Your family has been doing the opposite, systematically harming people for profit while maintaining a public image of caring about patient welfare. He met her eyes directly. I don't care how much money they have or how many people they can pressure. I'm not backing down from helping you expose them. Nadia felt tears forming as she looked at the letters, then at Lucan's determined expression. In 3 days, this man had shown more genuine integrity than she'd seen from her family in 3 decades. He was risking everything he'd built to help her do what was right, while her own blood relatives were mobilizing vast resources to prevent the truth from coming out. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For reminding me that there are still people in the world who care more about doing right than about avoiding consequences," she replied. As evening approached, they prepared for what both understood might be their last night of relative peace. Tomorrow would bring intensified pressure from her family, increased scrutiny from investigators, and decisions that would affect the lives of thousands of people. But for tonight, they had each other, they had the truth, and they had a shared commitment to seeing justice done, regardless of the personal cost. Over the following 2 weeks, as Portland's media circus continued to swirl around Nadia's disappearance and Crestwell Pharmaceuticals' plummeting stock price, an unlikely partnership evolved into something deeper and more complicated. What had begun as a crisis intervention had transformed into a collaboration between 2 people working toward the same goal from very different perspectives. Nadia's days were spent building their case against her family's company, using her insider knowledge to decode internal documents and her business education to trace financial relationships between Crestwell and other pharmaceutical manufacturers. Meanwhile, Lucan continued operating his towing service while dealing with an escalating campaign of bureaucratic harassment designed to pressure him into abandoning his houseguest. The fire department found 18 different violations during yesterday's inspection, Lucan said, reviewing the citation list over breakfast. "Apparently, my smoke detector batteries aren't the right brand. My emergency exit signage is 3 inches too low, and my fire extinguisher mounting brackets don't meet current seismic safety standards. How much will it cost to fix everything?" Nadia asked, looking up from her laptop where she'd been cross-referencing Crestwell's clinical trial data with FDA approval timelines. "About $15,000 if I hire contractors to do it right," Lucan replied. "Or I can do most of the work myself over the next few months while dealing with weekly follow-up inspections to monitor my progress." Nadia closed her laptop and studied Lucan's face. The stress of harboring a fugitive pharmaceutical heiress was taking its toll. He'd lost weight. His apartment was constantly cluttered with regulatory paperwork, and his normal customer service calls were frequently interrupted by officials demanding immediate attention to newly discovered compliance issues. "This is exactly what they did to Dr. Sarah Kim," she said, "the researcher who brought me the evidence about their cover-up. Suddenly her laboratory needed extensive safety upgrades. Her research grants required additional documentation. Her publication submissions faced unusual peer review delays. Within 6 months, her career was effectively destroyed through legal but coordinated harassment." "The difference is that I don't have a career that can be destroyed," Lucan replied with dark humor. "I own 3 tow trucks and a garage. They can make things difficult, but they can't take away my ability to help people with car trouble." What impressed Nadia most was Lucan's systematic approach to handling the pressure. Instead of becoming overwhelmed or angry, he treated each new bureaucratic challenge like a puzzle to be solved efficiently. He scheduled inspections during slow business hours, maintained detailed documentation of every interaction with city officials, and even began building relationships with other small business owners who'd experienced similar regulatory scrutiny. "I talked to Martinez down the street," he said, referring to the owner of an auto parts shop who'd been dealing with his own series of mysterious compliance issues. Turns out he's been getting the same treatment since he refused to sell his property to developers last year. We're thinking about forming a small business association to push back against discriminatory enforcement practices. You're organizing. Resistance, Nadia observed with admiration. I'm building community, Lucan corrected. Turns out your family isn't the only powerful interest that likes to pressure working-class people through regulatory harassment. There are a lot of us dealing with this kind of thing, and we're stronger together than we are separately. As their partnership deepened, Nadia began contributing to the household in ways that went beyond simply sharing information about pharmaceutical industry corruption. Her business education proved invaluable for organizing Lucan's financial records, and her technology skills helped him streamline his customer service operations. Meanwhile, her trust fund money, carefully accessed through encrypted transactions, provided resources for fighting the bureaucratic war her family was waging against them. I've been thinking about what happens after we expose my family's crimes, Nadia said one evening as they worked side by side at Lucan's kitchen table, she on legal research and he on business tax preparation. Even if we succeed in bringing them to justice, thousands of people will lose their jobs when Crestwell Pharmaceuticals faces criminal penalties and civil lawsuits. You're worried about collateral damage, Lucan said, looking up from a stack of invoices. I'm worried about destroying innocent people's livelihoods while punishing the guilty ones, she replied. Most of Crestwell's employees have no idea what the executives have been doing. Research scientists, manufacturing workers, administrative staff, they're just trying to develop and distribute medications that help people. Lucan considered this as he organized receipts by category. What if there was a way to preserve the legitimate parts of the company while eliminating the criminal leadership? Like what? Employee ownership, he said, warming to the idea. Convert Crestwell into a worker-owned cooperative that's focused on actual patient care rather than profit maximization. Use your insider knowledge to help them restructure around ethical pharmaceutical development. Nadia stared at him. That's actually brilliant. Worker cooperatives have completely different incentive structures than traditional corporations. They're much less likely to prioritize short-term profits over long-term social responsibility. They spent the next several hours researching successful examples of large companies that had transitioned to employee ownership, discussing how Crestwell's valuable research assets and manufacturing capabilities could be preserved while eliminating the systemic corruption that had characterized its leadership. This could be bigger than just exposing my family's crimes, Nadia said excitedly. We could be creating a model for how pharmaceutical companies should actually operate. Their collaboration extended beyond professional planning into personal territory neither had anticipated. Lucan discovered that despite her privileged background, Nadia possessed genuine curiosity about how things worked and impressive adaptability to circumstances far removed from her normal experience. She learned to cook simple meals, helped with basic maintenance around the garage, and even assisted with tow truck operations when Lucan needed an extra pair of hands. I never realized how much I didn't know about normal life, she said one afternoon, successfully changing the customers flat tire under Lucan's guidance. Private schools and business school don't exactly prepare you for real-world mechanical problems. You're learning fast, Lucan observed, watching her efficiently organize tools and clean up the work area. Most people from your background wouldn't be willing to get their hands dirty. Most people from my background never had to question whether their entire life was built on lies and exploitation, Nadia replied. Once you realize your trust fund is blood money, getting dirty doesn't seem like such a big deal. Their growing mutual respect was tested when Nadia's family escalated their pressure campaign beyond bureaucratic harassment. A private investigator began asking questions about Lucan's business relationships and personal history. while local media received anonymous tips about possible connections between his towing service and the missing pharmaceutical heiress. They're trying to discredit you before anyone discovers you're helping me, Nadia said, reading a speculative news article that suggested Lucan might be involved in her disappearance for financial gain. Let them try, Lucan replied. I've got 5 years of honest business records and dozens of satisfied customers who can vouch for my integrity. Your family's money might buy them influence, but it can't create a reputation for someone who doesn't deserve it. The crisis came when Edmund Cresswell himself made a public appeal for his daughter's safe return, offering a $1 million reward for information leading to her location while simultaneously suggesting that she might be the victim of manipulation or coercion by someone seeking to exploit her wealth and emotional vulnerability. He's positioning me as a victim and you as a predator, Nadia said angrily, watching her father's carefully orchestrated press conference. Classic victim-blaming strategy. Make it impossible for people to take my choices seriously by suggesting I'm not capable of making rational decisions. Is it working? Lucan asked. Nadia checked social media reactions and news commentary. Partially. A lot of people are buying the narrative that I'm having some kind of breakdown and that you're taking advantage of my mental state. But instead of driving them apart, the external pressure seemed to strengthen their bond. They developed inside. Jokes about the absurd bureaucratic requirements they were forced to meet, shared meals that had become a comfortable routine, and found themselves talking late into the night about everything from childhood experiences to philosophical questions, about corporate responsibility and social justice. I need you to know something, Nadia said one evening as they worked on preparing legal documents for eventual submission to federal prosecutors. Whatever happens when we go public with this information, these past few weeks have been the most honest and purposeful time of my adult life. Same here, Lucan replied. I've spent 5 years building a business that helps people with car trouble. But helping you fight against systematic corporate evil, this feels like something worth risking everything for. They'd moved from strangers to allies to something approaching genuine partnership, bound together by shared values and mutual respect, rather than the financial transactions or social obligations that had characterized most of Nadia's previous relationships. As they prepared for the next phase of their campaign against Cresswell Pharmaceuticals, both understood that their collaboration had evolved into something that would outlast the immediate crisis that had brought them together. The carefully maintained secrecy around Nadia's location finally collapsed on a rainy Thursday morning in November, 3 weeks after her disappearance, when a Portland television news crew arrived at Lucan's garage with cameras rolling and pointed questions about his relationship with the missing pharmaceutical heiress. Mr. Faraway, called reporter Angela Chun, approaching with a microphone as Lucan emerged from his office to check on the commotion in his parking lot. Sources have told Channel 8 News that you've been harboring Nadia Cresswell at your business location. Can you comment on your relationship with Miss Cresswell and whether you've been in contact with her family regarding her whereabouts? Lucan felt his stomach drop as he realized their time operating in secrecy was over. Behind the reporter, he could see a camera operator recording everything in a news van with satellite equipment parked across the street. Neighbors and customers were gathering to watch the spectacle, and his phone was already beginning to buzz with calls from numbers he didn't recognize. I don't have any comment, he said simply, walking back toward the garage entrance. Mr. Faraway, the Cresswell family is offering a $1 million reward for information about their daughter's location. The reporter continued, following him. Are you aware that concealing information about a missing person could constitute obstruction of justice? Inside the building, Nadia watched the news confrontation through the office window, her face pale with the realization that their sanctuary had been compromised. She'd been expecting this moment for weeks, but seeing it actually happen felt like watching a slow-motion disaster she was powerless to prevent. We need to leave, she said when Lucan came back inside, followed by persistent knocking from the news crew. If they've found me here, my family security people won't be far behind. Where would we go? Lucan asked, already moving to gather essential documents and equipment. If they've tracked us here, they can track us anywhere. The answer came within hours. By afternoon, the story had exploded across regional and national media, with speculation about Nadia's mental state, Lucan's motives, and the potential criminal implications of a pharmaceutical heiress disappearing just before taking control of her family's company. Edmund Crestwell appeared on 3 different news programs, expressing concern for his daughter's welfare while subtly suggesting that she was being manipulated by someone seeking to exploit her wealth and emotional vulnerability. My daughter has been under enormous pressure preparing for her leadership role at our company, he said during a CNN interview. We're deeply concerned that someone may be taking advantage of her stress and confusion during this difficult transition. Meanwhile, Lucan's business became the center of a media circus. Television crews set up outside his garage. Reporters interviewed his neighbors and customers, and social media filled with speculation about the relationship between the missing billionaire and the working-class mechanic who was supposedly hiding her dot. The pressure intensified when Portland police arrived at the garage with a search warrant, ostensibly looking for evidence related to Nadia's disappearance, but clearly hoping to find her on the premises. Although they didn't locate her, she'd moved to a safe house arranged by Dr. Sarah Kim. The search provided additional fodder for news coverage that painted Lucan as either a kidnapper or a gold digger exploiting a vulnerable woman. They're destroying your reputation, Nadia said during a tense phone call that evening, speaking from her temporary hiding place across town. Every news story makes it sound like you're either holding me against my will or manipulating me for financial gain. I'm more worried about what they're doing to you, Lucan replied. Your father is making you sound like someone who's had a mental breakdown and can't make rational decisions about your own life. The character assassination campaign reached its peak when James Crestwell, Nadia's younger brother, gave an emotional interview describing his sister's supposed history of mental health issues and erratic behavior. He painted a picture of a woman under extreme pressure who'd been known to make impulsive decisions during times of stress. Nadia has always been brilliant, but she's also struggled with anxiety and depression, he said, his performance convincing enough to generate sympathy from viewers who didn't know he was directly involved in the pharmaceutical conspiracy she was trying to expose. We're afraid that someone has convinced her that her own family is her enemy, when we're actually the people who love her most and want to help her. But the Crestwell family's attempts to control the narrative began to backfire when other pharmaceutical industry whistleblowers started coming forward. Inspired by the attention surrounding Nadia's disappearance, Dr. Sarah Kim agreed to speak publicly about her attempts to expose Crestwell's research data and her credibility as a respected scientist. Lent weight to the allegations of corporate misconduct. I tried for 2 years to get Crestwell Pharmaceuticals to address the safety issues with their medications, she said during a televised interview. When internal channels failed, I brought evidence to Nadia Crestwell because I believed she had the power and the integrity to do something about what I'd discovered. Additional former employees began sharing their own stories of being pressured to suppress negative research results or target vulnerable populations with aggressive marketing for potentially addictive medications. The missing heiress story evolved into a broader investigation of pharmaceutical industry practices, with Nadia's disappearance serving as the catalyst for long overdue scrutiny of corporate behavior. Edmund Crestwell found himself facing hostile questions during congressional hearings about pharmaceutical pricing and safety protocols. Company stock prices continued to plummet as investors worried about potential criminal liability and regulatory penalties. Federal prosecutors opened formal investigations into Crestwell's clinical trial data and marketing practices. They're losing control of the situation, Nadia observed during one of her secret meetings with Lucan, held in an anonymous restaurant outside Portland. The story has become bigger than my disappearance or your involvement. People are starting to ask questions about pharmaceutical industry practices that my family can't deflect or discredit. But the intensified scrutiny also brought additional pressure on both of them. Lucan's garage was subjected to daily protests from groups demanding information about Nadia's whereabouts, while his business license faced review by multiple regulatory agencies. His personal life was dissected by reporters who interviewed his ex-wife, former employers, and anyone else who might provide information about his character and motivations. "I can't keep operating under these conditions," he told Nadia during another clandestine meeting. "My customers are being harassed, my employees are quitting, and I'm spending more time dealing with media and regulatory issues than actually running my business." "I'm sorry," Nadia said, her voice heavy with guilt. "I never intended for helping me to destroy your life." "It's not destroyed," Lucan replied firmly, "but it's definitely changed. The question is whether we're going to let your family's pressure campaign succeed in separating us, or whether we're going to fight back with everything we've got. The decision point came when Edmund Cresswell made a public offer to meet with his daughter privately, with no media present and no legal consequences, if she would simply return home and resume her preparations for becoming CEO. The offer was designed to make Nadia look unreasonable if she refused, while giving her family an opportunity to either convince her to stay quiet or to claim she'd been brainwashed by outside influences. "It's a trap," Nadia said immediately. "The moment I set foot in a room with my father, I become subject to family pressure, legal manipulation, and possibly involuntary psychiatric evaluation. They've already laid the groundwork for claiming I'm mentally incompetent, so we don't take the meeting," Lucan said. "We go public with everything we've discovered and let federal prosecutors sort out who's telling the truth. But going public would mean exposing themselves to even more intense scrutiny, potential criminal charges for their own actions, and the likelihood that powerful pharmaceutical interests would mobilize every resource to discredit their evidence and destroy their reputations." The stakes had escalated far beyond what either had anticipated when Lucan first offered to help a distressed stranger outside a corporate building. As they prepared for what both understood would be the final confrontation with forces much more powerful than themselves, Nadia and Lucan faced a choice that would determine not only their own futures, but potentially the fate of thousands of patients who'd been harmed by Cresswell Pharmaceuticals' systematic deception. The breaking point came on a gray December morning, when Lucan discovered that his business insurance had been canceled due to elevated risk factors associated with ongoing criminal investigations, and his primary bank had frozen his accounts pending federal review of suspicious financial activities. The coordinated assault on his livelihood had reached the point where continuing to help Nadia meant potentially losing everything he'd spent 5 years building. Nadia found him sitting in his office at dawn, surrounded by termination notices, legal documents, and regulatory citations that would take months and thousands of dollars to resolve. His usually composed demeanor had cracked, revealing the exhaustion and stress that weeks of harassment had created. "They've effectively shut down my business," he said without looking up from the papers scattered across his desk. "No insurance means I can't legally operate tow trucks. Frozen accounts mean I can't pay employees, cover rent, or handle basic operating expenses. Your family has managed to destroy 5 years of work without filing a single criminal charge." Nadia sat down across from him, feeling the weight of responsibility for his situation crushing down on her chest. "I'm so sorry, Lucan. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen when I first asked for your help." "It's not your fault," he replied, finally meeting her eyes. "I knew this was a possibility when I decided to stand with you. But knowing something intellectually and actually living through the destruction of your life are two very different experiences." The strain was showing on both of them. 3 weeks of hiding, planning and fighting against forces with virtually unlimited resources, had taken its toll. Nadia had lost weight and developed dark circles under her eyes from sleepless nights spent researching legal strategies and reviewing pharmaceutical industry documents. Lucan looked older than his 34 years, worn down by the constant pressure of bureaucratic warfare and media scrutiny. "Maybe your father is right," Lucan said quietly, the words hanging heavy in the small office. "Maybe I am someone taking advantage of your vulnerability during a difficult time." "Don't say that," Nadia responded immediately. "You know that's not true." "Do I?" he asked, gesturing toward the termination notices. "Look what associating with me has cost you. Your reputation, your relationship with your family, your inheritance, your career. Maybe you'd be better off taking his deal and going back to your old life." The suggestion felt like a physical blow to Nadia. "My old life was built on blood money and lies. Going back to that means becoming complicit in the ongoing harm to thousands of patients who trust Crustwell medications. And staying with me means watching both our lives get systematically destroyed by people with more money and power than we can possibly fight," Lucan countered. "At least if you go back, you could try to change things from inside the company." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the office door. Through the glass they could see a well-dressed woman in an expensive coat, flanked by two men in dark suits who had the unmistakable bearing of private security professionals. "Miss Crestwell," the woman called through the door. "My name is Victoria Hayes. I'm a senior partner at Hayes, Morrison & Associates, representing your family's interests. We need to have a conversation." Nadia recognized the name from her father's legal team. Hayes was one of the most powerful corporate attorneys in the Pacific Northwest, specializing in crisis management for wealthy families facing public scandals. Her presence meant the situation had escalated to the level where Edmund Crestwell was willing to deploy his most expensive legal resources. "I don't have anything to say to my family's representatives," Nadia called back. "Miss Crestwell, we have a court order for psychological evaluation based on concerns about your mental competency raised by family members," Hayes replied smoothly. "You can come with us voluntarily, or we can involve local law enforcement. But either way, you're coming with us today." The threat hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Nadia felt panic rising in her chest as she realized her family had played their final card, using the legal system to declare her mentally incompetent and force her into psychiatric evaluation, probably leading to involuntary commitment that would effectively silence her permanently. "They can't do that," she whispered to Lucan. "Yes, they can," he replied grimly, checking his phone for news about the court order. "Especially if they've convinced a judge that you're displaying erratic behavior and associating with potentially dangerous individuals who might be manipulating you." The cruel brilliance of her family's strategy became clear. By painting Lucan as either a criminal kidnapper or a manipulative gold digger, they'd created a legal foundation for claiming that Nadia's decision to expose their pharmaceutical conspiracy was evidence of mental instability rather than moral courage. "Miss Crestwell," Hayes called again, "this can be handled quietly and with dignity, or it can become a public spectacle. The choice is yours." Lucan stood up and walked to the window, studying the scene outside. In addition to Hayes and her security team, he could see Portland police officers positioned at strategic points around the building. News vans were already arriving, drawn by the promise of dramatic footage of the missing pharmaceutical heiress being taken into custody. "There's no way out of this," he said, the defeat in his voice cutting through Nadia like a knife. "They've covered all the angles." "There has to be something we can do," Nadia insisted. But even as she spoke, she could feel the walls closing in around them. "What can we do?" Lucan asked, turning back to face her. "I'm a mechanic with frozen bank accounts and canceled insurance policies. You're about to be declared mentally incompetent and committed to psychiatric evaluation. Your family has more lawyers, more money, and more political connections than we could challenge in a lifetime." The hopelessness in his voice was more devastating than the legal threats outside. For the first time since they'd started working together, Lucan sounded like he was ready to give up. "Maybe this is how it ends," he continued, sitting back down at his desk and starting to organize the papers that represented the destruction of his business. "Maybe some fights are just too big for regular people to win." "You don't mean that," Nadia said, but uncertainty crept into her voice. "Don't I?" he replied. "Look around, Nadia. Look at what fighting your family has accomplished. My business is destroyed, your reputation is in ruins, and your father is about to have you declared mentally incompetent. Meanwhile, Crestwell Pharmaceuticals is still operating, still producing medications that addict patients, and still generating billions in profits from human suffering." The brutal assessment of their situation hung between them like an indictment of everything they'd tried to accomplish. Outside, they could hear Hayes growing impatient with the delay, and police officers were beginning to position themselves for a potential forced entry. "If I go with them," Nadia said quietly, "what happens to all the evidence we've gathered? What happens to the case against my family?" "It disappears," Lucan admitted. "Without you to corroborate the documents and provide insider testimony, everything we've discovered becomes hearsay that expensive lawyers can discredit or suppress." The weight of that reality settled over both of them. All their work, all the risks they'd taken, all the sacrifices they'd made would be meaningless if Nadia was successfully neutralized through psychiatric commitment. "There's something else," Lucan said, his voice barely audible. "Something I need to tell you before this is over." Nadia looked at him expectantly. "I've been thinking about my ex-wife," he continued. "About why our marriage fell apart and what it taught me about fighting. Battles I couldn't win." "What do you mean? What do you mean?" Lucan was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. "Sarah, my ex-wife, not the researcher, came from a wealthy family. Not as wealthy as yours, but enough that there was always an imbalance between us. Her family never approved of her marrying a mechanic, and they spent 5 years making that disapproval clear through 1,000 small humiliations and deliberate exclusions." He met Nadia's eyes. "I thought love would be enough to overcome the class differences, but I was wrong. Eventually, the pressure from her family and the constant struggle to prove myself worthy wore us both down. She ended up choosing the security and acceptance of her family over the uncertainty of building something different with me." "That's not what's happening here," Nadia protested, "isn't it?" Lucan asked. "You're a billionaire pharmaceutical heiress, and I'm a working-class mechanic who fixes cars for a living. Your family has unlimited resources to make our lives difficult, and I've already lost my business trying to help you fight them. How long before you start wondering if this is really worth the cost?" The question struck at Nadia's deepest insecurities. "You think I'm going to abandon you like your ex-wife did? I think you're going to realize that fighting your family means giving up everything, your wealth, your status, your future, to be with someone who can't offer you anything close to what you're used to," Lucan replied. "And I think you're going to decide that's too high a price to pay." "You're wrong," Nadia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Because right now your family is offering you a way back to your old life. Take the psychiatric evaluation. Claim you were temporarily confused by stress and manipulation. Accept treatment for whatever mental health issues their doctors diagnose, and return to your position as heir to a $15 billion pharmaceutical empire." He gestured toward the door where Hayes was waiting. "All you have to do is walk out there and tell them you want to go home. Your trust fund gets restored, your reputation gets rehabilitated, and you get to live in comfort and luxury for the rest of your life. Built on blood money," Nadia reminded him. "But built nonetheless," Lucan replied. "While fighting alongside me gets you what exactly? A life on the run, constant legal battles, destroyed relationships, and the probability that we'll lose anyway because your family has more resources than we can possibly match. The cruel logic of his argument was undeniable. Even if they somehow managed to expose Crestwell's crimes, Nadia would likely face years of litigation, financial ruin, and social ostracism. Meanwhile, the pharmaceutical industry had enough political and legal protection to ensure that any penalties would be manageable business expenses rather than genuine accountability. "Miss Crestwell," Hayes called again, her voice carrying a note of finality. "We're prepared to enter the building if necessary." Nadia stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the assembled forces arrayed against them. Police officers, corporat attorneys, private security, news crews, all mobilized to ensure that she either returned to her family's control or was discredited as a mentally unstable woman who couldn't be trusted to make rational decisions about her own life. "Maybe you're right," she said, her voice barely audible. "Maybe this fight is too big for us to win." Lucan felt something break inside his chest as he heard the defeat in her voice. Despite everything he'd said about the futility of their situation, he'd been hoping she would find a way to argue against his pessimism, to convince him that their partnership was worth the devastating costs it had imposed on both their lives. "So what do we do?" he asked. Nadia turned back to face him, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know how to fight people who have unlimited money and no scruples about using it to destroy anyone who threatens them. I don't know how to maintain relationships with people when associating with me puts them in danger. And I don't know how to ask you to keep sacrificing everything you've worked for to help me fight a battle we're probably going to lose." The admission hung between them like a funeral shroud. After weeks of defiant determination, both had reached the point where the costs of resistance seemed to outweigh any possible benefits. The systematic destruction of Lucan's business, the threats to Nadia's freedom, and the overwhelming power of the Crestwell family's resources had finally achieved their intended effect. "If I go with them," Nadia said quietly, "will you be able to rebuild your business?" "Probably," Lucan replied. "Once you're back under your family's control and no longer considered a missing person, the regulatory pressure on me should ease up. I can fight the bureaucratic citations, restore my insurance, and get back to helping people with car trouble." "That's what you should do," she said, moving toward the door. "You've already sacrificed too much trying to help me. I can't ask you to lose everything for a cause that's probably hopeless anyway." But as Nadia reached for the door handle, preparing to surrender to her family's representatives and accept whatever psychiatric treatment they deemed necessary to restore her compliance, Lucan felt a sudden surge of clarity about what was really at stake. "Wait," he said. She paused, hand on the door. "There's one more thing I need to tell you," he continued, standing up from his desk and walking toward her. "Something about why I really decided to help you that first night." Nadia turned back to face him, waiting. "It wasn't just because I recognized someone in crisis," Lucan said. "It was because I saw someone willing to give up everything to do what was right, even when doing right meant losing everything they'd ever wanted." He moved closer to her. "And that reminded me of who I used to be before life wore me down, before I started accepting that some fights are too big and some people are too powerful to challenge." "Lucan, no, let me finish," he interrupted. "My marriage failed because I let other people's money and influence convince me I wasn't worth fighting for. My business is being destroyed because your family wants to punish me for believing you deserve support. But losing those things doesn't make me wrong about what's right." The passion in his voice cut through the despair that had been consuming both of them. "You asked me what we should do," he continued. "Here's what I think we should do. We should walk out there together, face whatever consequences your family wants to impose, and trust that doing the right thing matters more than winning or losing." Nadia stared at him, feeling something rekindle in her chest that she'd thought had been extinguished by weeks of overwhelming pressure. "You're talking about sacrificing everything," she said. I'm talking about refusing to let fear and money determine what kind of people we're going to be, Lucan replied. Your family's counting on us to give up because the cost of fighting seems too high, but maybe the cost of not fighting is even higher. As they stood facing each other in the small office, surrounded by the evidence of how much their resistance had already cost them, both Nadia and Lucan had to decide whether their partnership was strong enough to survive the final test that waited beyond the door. Nadia looked into Lucan's eyes and saw something she'd rarely encountered in her privileged life: genuine courage that wasn't based on money, power, or social connections. Here was a man who'd lost his business, his financial security, and his reputation, yet still believed that doing the right thing mattered more than avoiding consequences. You're asking me to choose between safety and integrity, she said, her voice steadier than it had been in days. I'm asking you to choose between the person your family wants you to be and the person you actually are, Lucan replied. Everything else is just details. Outside, Victoria Hayes had grown tired of waiting. Miss Crestwell, we're coming in, she announced, followed by the sound of keys in the lock. Edmund Crestwell had apparently obtained building access through his network of business connections, eliminating their last few minutes of privacy. Whatever we're going to do, we need to decide now, Lucan said. Nadia took a deep breath and made the choice that would define the rest of her life. We walk out there together. We tell the truth about what Crestwell Pharmaceuticals has been doing. And we trust that the evidence we've gathered is strong enough to survive whatever legal challenges my family throws at us. Even if it means losing everything? Especially if it means losing everything, she replied with sudden conviction. Because the alternative is becoming complicit in systematic murder for profit, and I'd rather be a broke whistleblower with a clear conscience than a billionaire with blood on her hands. As Hayes and her security team entered the office, followed by police officers and a court-appointed psychiatrist, Nadia and Lucan stood side by side, presenting a united front that clearly surprised the corporate attorney. Miss Crestwell, Hayes began smoothly, I'm here on behalf of your family, who are deeply concerned about your welfare. We have documentation showing erratic behavior, associations with potentially dangerous individuals, and statements suggesting you may be experiencing a psychological crisis. The only crisis I'm experiencing, Nadia replied calmly, is learning that my family built their pharmaceutical empire by deliberately addicting patients to medications they knew were harmful. She pulled out her laptop and opened the comprehensive database she and Lucan had compiled over the past month. I have internal company documents proving systematic suppression of clinical trial data, financial records showing bribes to regulatory officials, and marketing strategies designed to target vulnerable populations with addictive painkillers. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the court-appointed psychiatrist, stepped forward with practiced authority. Ms. Crestwell, delusional thinking and paranoid accusations against family members are common symptoms of acute stress disorders. We're here to help you get the treatment you need. Then examine the evidence before you make any diagnoses, Nadia said, turning her laptop screen toward the psychiatrist. These aren't delusions. They're financial records, clinical trial data, and internal communications that document criminal behavior. For the next hour, what had been planned as a simple psychiatric intervention became an impromptu presentation of evidence that neither Hayes nor Dr. Martinez was prepared to handle. Nadia methodically walked them through documents showing how Crestwell Pharmaceuticals had manipulated addiction rates, suppressed overdose statistics, and generated billions in profits from systematic patient harm. Meanwhile, Lucan had quietly activated a live streaming application on his phone, broadcasting the entire confrontation to social media platforms, where thousands of viewers were watching the missing pharmaceutical heiress present evidence of corporate malfeasance to her family's legal representatives. This is inappropriate, Hayes interjected when she realized their attempt to quietly remove Nadia was becoming a public revelation of Crestwell's crimes. Ms. Crestwell is clearly in need of medical attention, and these allegations are the product of a disturbed mental state. If I'm mentally disturbed, Nadia replied, then explain how I was able to compile detailed financial analyses, cross-reference clinical trial data with FDA approval timelines, and document systematic bribery across multiple regulatory agencies. Dr. Martinez had been quietly reviewing the evidence on Nadia's laptop, her expression growing increasingly troubled as she recognized the sophisticated nature of the documentation. These appear to be legitimate pharmaceutical industry documents, she said slowly. If they're authentic, they represent serious allegations of corporate misconduct rather than delusional thinking. The psychiatrist's professional assessment undermined the entire foundation of the Crestwell family strategy. Without a credible mental health diagnosis, they couldn't justify involuntary commitment or claim that Nadia's accusations were the product of psychological instability. Dr. Martinez, Hayes said sharply, your role here is to evaluate Ms. Crestwell's mental competency, not to analyze corporate documents. My role is to provide an accurate psychiatric assessment, Dr. Martinez replied firmly. And based on my interaction with Ms. Crestwell, she demonstrates clear thinking, detailed knowledge of complex subjects, and rational responses to challenging situations. I see no evidence of mental incompetency or need for involuntary psychiatric treatment. The live stream audience had grown to over 50,000 viewers as news of the confrontation spread across social media. Comments flooded in from healthcare professionals, pharmaceutical industry workers, and patients who recognized the medications and practices Nadia was describing. The story was evolving in real time from a family intervention into a public expose of pharmaceutical industry corruption. Edmund Crestwell arrived at the garage just as his legal strategy was collapsing around him. Through the office windows, he could see his daughter presenting evidence of his company's crimes to a live internet audience, while his corporate attorney struggled to contain a situation that had spiraled completely beyond their control. Nadia, he said, entering the office with the commanding presence that had intimidated business rivals and regulatory officials for 3 decades. Enough of this nonsense. You're coming home where you belong. I belong wherever I can do the most good, she replied, not backing down from his authoritative tone. And right now, that means exposing the crimes you've committed in the name of medical innovation. Crimes? Edmund's voice carried genuine outrage. I've built one of the most successful pharmaceutical companies in American history. I've brought life-saving medications to millions of patients around the world. You've brought addictive medications to millions of patients who trusted you to help them heal, Nadia countered. And when those medications caused addiction, overdoses, and deaths, you covered up the evidence and marketed them even more aggressively. Father and daughter faced each other across the small office while thousands of people watched online, and news crews gathered outside. The confrontation represented more than a family dispute. It was a clash between 2 fundamentally different visions of corporate responsibility and moral accountability. Even if some of our medications have had unexpected side effects, Edmund said, shifting to damage control mode, the benefits have far outweighed any negative consequences. You can't make medical breakthroughs without accepting some level of risk. You didn't accept risk, Nadia replied, opening another file on her laptop. You systematically concealed known risks, while marketing medications to populations you knew were most vulnerable to addiction. That's not medical innovation. That's calculated exploitation. The live stream reached 100,000 viewers. As Nadia presented internal Crestwell documents showing deliberate targeting of elderly patients, injured workers, and others with chronic pain conditions, the evidence painted a clear picture of corporate executives who had prioritized profit maximization over patient safety for more than a decade. Dr. Sarah Kim, the researcher who had originally brought the evidence to Nadia's attention, arrived at the garage with additional documentation that had been hidden in Crestwell's research databases. Her presence as a credible scientist added further legitimacy to the allegations and undermined attempts to dismiss the accusations as family drama or mental health issues. I tried for 2 years to get Crestwell's leadership to address these safety concerns through internal channels, Dr. Kim said, addressing the live stream audience directly. When that failed, I brought the evidence to Nadia because I believed she had the integrity and the authority to ensure patient safety was prioritized over corporate profits. The weight of evidence had become overwhelming. Federal prosecutors, who had been monitoring the situation since Nadia's initial disappearance, announced they were opening formal criminal investigations into Crestwell Pharmaceuticals' research practices, regulatory compliance, and marketing strategies. Congressional leaders called for emergency hearings on pharmaceutical industry oversight. Medical journals began publishing previously suppressed research about addiction, risks associated with Crestwell's medications. Edmund Crestwell found himself facing the collapse of everything he'd built over 30 years. Stock prices had plummeted to historic lows. Criminal investigations were expanding across multiple jurisdictions, and civil lawsuits were being filed by patients and families who had been harmed by deliberately addictive medications. "You've destroyed our family's legacy," he said to Nadia, his commanding presence finally cracking under the weight of public exposure. "I've ended our family's participation in systematic patient harm," she replied. "The legacy I want is helping to create a pharmaceutical industry that actually prioritizes healing over profit." 3 months later, Nadia stood in the conference room of a renovated warehouse in Portland's industrial district, addressing the first board meeting of the Patient Safety Cooperative, a worker-owned pharmaceutical development organization that had emerged from the ashes of Crestwell Pharmaceuticals' criminal collapse. Edmund Crestwell had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and violations of public health regulations. Crestwell Pharmaceuticals had been dissolved through bankruptcy proceedings, with its research assets and manufacturing facilities transferred to the new cooperative structure that prioritized patient outcomes over shareholder profits. Our first quarterly report shows that we've successfully transitioned 12 different medication production lines to our worker-owned model, Nadia announced to the assembled employee owners, researchers, and patient advocates who now controlled the organization. More importantly, we've identified 17 different ways to reduce addiction potential in pain management medications while maintaining their therapeutic effectiveness. Lucan sat in the back of the room, wearing a suit that still looked slightly uncomfortable on his mechanic's frame, but couldn't hide the pride in his expression as he watched Nadia address the cooperative members. He'd become the organization's director of community outreach, using his experience helping people in crisis to build relationships with patient advocacy groups and healthcare providers. After the meeting, they walked together through the facility, where former Crestwell employees were developing medications, using ethical research practices and transparent safety protocols. The worker-owned cooperative had attracted some of the most talented pharmaceutical researchers in the country, scientists who were excited about the opportunity to prioritize patient welfare over profit margins. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucan asked as they stood in the main laboratory, watching researchers work on developing non-addictive pain management alternatives. "Giving up your inheritance to build something completely different?" Nadia considered the question as she looked around the facility that had become her life's work. She'd lost her trust fund, her social status, and her relationship with most of her family, but gained something she'd never expected to find, a sense of purpose that went beyond personal achievement or financial success. "I regret that it took me 28 years to discover that my family's fortune was built on harming people," she said. "But I don't regret choosing to do something about it once I found out." They walked outside into the Portland evening, past the sign that read, "Patient Safety Cooperative, Healthcare Innovation Through Worker Ownership." Lucan's rebuilt towing business was based in a garage across the street, and he split his time between emergency vehicle service and his cooperative outreach work. "Remember that night when you found me destroying documents outside your family's building?" Lucan asked. "The night that changed everything," Nadia replied. "I was just trying to help someone who looked like they needed it," he said. "I had no idea I was getting involved in taking down one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in America." Nadia smiled as they reached Lucan's garage, where Faraway Emergency Services, helping people when they need it most, was painted in simple letters on the side of the building. "And I had no idea that running away from blood money would lead me to someone who understood that integrity matters more than security." As they stood together in the industrial district where their unlikely partnership had first taken shape, both understood that their choice to fight against impossible odds had transformed not only their own lives, but potentially the future of pharmaceutical development in America. The Patient Safety Cooperative was already inspiring similar worker-owned healthcare initiatives across the country, proving that alternatives to profit-driven medicine were not only possible but more effective at actually helping patients. It was the sound of their shared laughter and the sight of their intertwined hands that would have caught Ryan Cooper's attention if he'd been driving his tow truck through that Portland neighborhood on that particular evening. But this time, there was no crisis to resolve, no one who needed rescuing from desperate circumstances. Sometimes, the most important journeys begin with the courage to walk away from everything you thought you wanted, toward people who remind you of who you actually are. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.